is also the co-chair of the Oxford Housing Action Collaborative, in addition to being the executive director for the Social Planning Council Oxford. She wears lots of hats, and she's leading this project in partnership with United Way and the housing collaborative. So we're really excited to be able to share the results and to engage in conversation today. If I could take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on. We will begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all of the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Ananashbek, the Lenape, and the Haudenosaunee. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic and current connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made and are making, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, our province, and our country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the current contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. Thank you for allowing me that. And just before we turn the controls and the microphone over to Stephanie, I just want to give you a quick overview of what the rules are for today. So we are going to be speaking about the local homeless situation and our current environment. We are not going to be talking about individuals per se. And so this is a safe and a caring environment, and we are not going to tolerate any kind of hate speech or that kind of negativity that's directed to others less fortunate. The session will be recorded and it will be available on the Social Planning Council Oxford website, United Way website, and I think will be shared broadly as much as possible. And so we want people to have future viewing opportunities. We want you to be able to share with people you know as well. But because it's being recorded, all of the participants who are here today as viewers are both muted, and you have no ability for the camera, and we've done that for privacy reasons. But we are so although those have been disabled, the chat box is open, and so we are encouraging you to use the chat box if you want to ask questions. It will be monitored, and we will do our best to answer those questions possibly following as many as possible following the presentation. And then I also ask your consideration that this is fairly new technology to us in lots of ways and from a presentation perspective. So there's often a little hiccup and or a dog barking or something. And so bear with us as we go through that. So the purpose of today's meeting is to share with you the progress and the results of the community-wide registry week from last week, and to let you know a little bit about what the next steps are going to be. I think that's really important. And this work is really important. It's very timely for Oxford County. And so we are really pleased to be able to share. You can see the agenda here. There's lots of great content to follow. And I'm going to now turn it over to Stephanie to take us through this work.
Thank you, Kelly. So we thought we would start off first by providing some context. So as you know, we're in a housing crisis in Oxford, but that's not necessarily unique to Oxford. It's been declared a crisis across the country and actually in the world. So one of our partners that's part of the Housing Collaborative is Oxford County, and they prepared this graphic last year. And so we thought it was important context to start off with when you're thinking about housing in general and understanding the housing continuum. So as you can see, the continuum refers to various housing types and needs across the spectrum. So on the left-hand side, and I don't have the laser pointer that Anna's going to use in a second that you're going to need to see, but on the left-hand side, it's referring to people experiencing homelessness, all the way over to the right-hand side, which is home ownership. And the idea that it's a spectrum and that all of these types of housing and the needs associated with the different types of housing are all interconnected. So today we're going to be talking about the left-hand side of the continuum, which is homelessness. So we're very happy that you're all here. So just before we launch into the results, we wanted to give a little bit more in terms of definition and whatnot. So according to the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, homelessness describes the situation of an individual or family without stable, permanent, appropriate, or the immediate prospect, means, and ability of acquiring it. And so this is important that we're all kind of on the same page when we start talking about this. In the actual definition, it talks about sort of 4 different areas, and we're going to highlight 3. But it's referring to the ranges of living situations, physical living situations that people are living in. So homelessness can include people who are unsheltered, so that could be sleeping rough in cars, in bus shelters, people who are emergency sheltered, and we wanted to highlight here that this can refer to homelessness shelters, but also domestic violence shelters, and then provisionally accommodated, and that includes couch surfing, staying in motels, transitional housing. So really what provisionally accommodating means is temporary. There's a lack of security of tenure. And this piece is really important for the rural context, because research has actually found that in rural communities, homelessness is often a lot more invisible, with a lot more people couch surfing and having to be in these temporary situations. There is a 4th category, which is called at risk of homelessness. And it refers to people who are not homeless, but whose current economic or housing situation is precarious. We didn't highlight this on the slide because for the purposes of our survey, we were focusing on people who are unsheltered, emergency sheltered, and provisionally accommodated. But I think it's important context to understand there's people that are also precariously housed. This last point here is just saying that what we know to be true from research and from people's experiences is that homelessness is a result of a number of different factors, but there's systemic or societal barriers, a lack of affordable and appropriate housing, and then can include racism, discrimination, and then also individuals, households, financial, mental, cognitive, behavioral, physical challenges. So it's not about blaming individuals, but there's a number of different factors at play, including those systemic pieces as well. So a little bit of context about who we are. So the Oxford Housing Action Collaborative is made up of a number of partners, and I did end up listing them all here. So I'll just quickly list who we have around the table at this point. We have the Tillsonburg Ingersoll Hospital, OPP, the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Oxford Community Health Centre, the Domestic Abuse Services Oxford, Operation Sharing, Ingamo Homes, United Way, Oxford County, Indwell, the Oxford County Library, Salvation Army Woodstock, and we also have some private developers around the table. So basically what happened was we were partners that believed that collectively we could move the needle locally on the housing crisis. We thought that there's a lot of great work that's happening in the community, but what could we do at that systemic level? We are very excited to, be in the current context where there is this national recognition of housing as a human right. The National Housing Strategy has been pretty clear on that. And there's been a lot of political will and political rhetoric, both at the federal, provincial level, and also locally here, to recognize the importance of housing and commitments that have been made at those different levels to actually end chronic homelessness, which is very exciting. So we went through as a collaborative a process to identify the needs and looked at that housing continuum and thought, where are the different places that we could be intervening? So we learned that there have been communities actually in North America that have ended chronic homelessness. And that was pretty exciting to the group, that there have been communities that have been able to do that. And so what could we learn from those communities? So we ended up applying to Trillium Foundation, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, for a grant to complete some work to kind of get us started. So this piece that we're talking about today, there's 3 priority areas that we're covering. Today we're going to be talking about the last one there, Registry Week. But we also are doing an emergency shelter review of the 3 shelters, and I'll speak a little bit more to that later, and also understanding the varying needs in different municipalities. So today we're going to focus on Registry Week, and that's why you're all here. So before we get into the data and the drum roll around that, I'll just give a little bit of the method so you understand the process that we took in order to get to this point. So communities that have ended homelessness in North America, the first step they actually take as a group systemically is to do a Registry Week. So the methods we use were similar methods to these other communities. And really what Registry Week is a community-wide survey. So the purpose really is to provide a snapshot and to really enhance awareness of homelessness in Oxford County. It provides us a way to track progress and trends, and then it also allows for information to create momentum around a by name list and connect people with services. So there's a definite sort of community awareness piece, but then there's also information that then can be used by the partners to help people with their housing placements. So last week, we did the survey. So you're getting the preliminary results today. So hot off the press. There's not really a press, I guess. Hot off the virtual piece. So it was the Registry Week itself was November 23rd through 26th. We had 45 surveyors at 25 locations across the county. In addition, so a lot of these were social service agencies that would already be meeting with people. In some cases, because of COVID, we had surveyors that would call folks as well from their caseload. We also had surveyors out visiting known locations. And a kind of interesting note is we did set up a phone line, a 1-800 number for people. We wanted to make sure it's 1-800 so Tillsonburg didn't have to incur any long distance charges. And we did receive a few phone calls on that line. We were surprised with that. So we wanted to make note that that was another option for people if they did have access to a phone. We also did end up having some people that needed to use interpreters to complete the survey. So we also wanted to note that was an important piece that we made to try to make it more accessible. Of course, COVID, and we'll talk about the limitations in a second, but of course, COVID provides some additional barriers and with trying to connect with people, but we tried our best to have it be across the county at different sites. And Anna's going to speak to a bit more about that information of where surveys occurred. Basically, the survey itself, there's standard questions that are asked, and these are similar to what are asked across the country. But then what we did as a collaborative was added some local context questions that we thought were relevant for our community. So really, if people met the definition of homelessness that I mentioned earlier in terms of those 3 categories of unsheltered, emergency sheltered, or provisionally accommodated, then they were asked if they wanted to participate in the survey. So it was totally voluntary. And it covered questions about their demographic information, history of homelessness, and their housing as well as their needs. So that's what Anna's going to cover today. So just really quick, the limitations. As we know, this is only a snapshot of the current picture. So the number that we reveal to you isn't the entire picture of all those experiencing homelessness. And especially it's difficult to reach people who are couch surfing that may not be accessing services. And there's, in some cases, people decline to answer, or they may not be able to participate. The other piece we wanted to note was the weather. As you know, we had a big snowstorm on Monday, and some of the encampments that had been there the previous week, we went to return to, and were no longer there, had been cleaned up. So weather kind of plays a factor in some of this, as well as COVID, which I know you all know in terms of the reality. But in some cases, it's limited capacity of some of the organizations in terms of how people can come in, as well as restricted service hours and how they're meeting with clients or different folks. So we know that that's all part of this picture, but it helps to say up front sort of those limitations. So we thought, and I have to make sure I can get Murley up here, but before he speaks, we thought we would, before we get into the results, we would convey some surveyor experiences that were worth noting. So I'm going to share, so I did a lot of surveys, I was out and about, and I'm going to share a little piece, and then I'm going to pass it over to Murley, and I'm going to get his screen up here as well. So just for you to know, surveyors were instructed to chat with everyone they saw when they were out and about. So it didn't matter, you just talk to everybody. And this is because we can't know just by looking at someone who's experiencing homelessness. So we just were chatting with everybody. So I was outside surveying a lovely man in a public space, and a passerby asked me what we were doing. And I just said, oh, we're just chatting with everyone, and we want to survey people without a permanent home. And she started saying derogatory things about people experiencing homelessness, and she walked off. So I was really mad at myself that I didn't say something back. And I apologized to the man that I was chatting with for that I didn't say anything back. And he said, it's okay, I get this all the time. And so I think I wanted to share this with you because I experienced this episode one time, and I think of all the emotions that I had and that brought on for me. I can't imagine having to experience this every day. So I wanted to share that with you. And now I'm going to turn it to Murley Wheaton from the Tillsonburg Library, who's going to share his experience as a surveyor. And I have to turn on your camera, Murley. You should be able to turn your camera on now. Yay, hi.
Hi. So my name is Murley Wheaton. I am a community librarian with the Oxford County Library, and I've been working with the Oxford County Housing Coalition for the better part of this year, I think. I was really interested in being a part of surveying. Libraries are in many ways on the forefront of providing support and help to people who are experiencing life in all kinds of ways. And we have noted within libraries that more and more people who are dealing with some level of housing instability and homelessness are coming to libraries as one of the only free spaces, public spaces that there are. So we had prepped the site that I was going to be surveying last week. And then I went on vacation and came back just to do the survey. And I was so glad that I did. It, as already said, it was a really powerful experience to have those opportunities to talk with someone who is experiencing homelessness. I was attempting to speak with anybody who came by, and sometimes that allowed for some conversations about the issue itself for people who had housing, and just to identify that this was being done, and that if they were interested in the findings later on, that would be available. But I did have the opportunity to interview a handful of people. And the first thing that I wanted to say as someone who was doing the surveying is that it was a really humbling experience. The people would stop and share what are some very personal experiences and difficult experiences. And that was a really impactful thing for me. Intellectually, I know lots about the issues of homelessness, but to actually speak with people and hear the details of their own unique stories, I think was really powerful and an important learning experience for me. And the second point that I wanted to bring as a surveyor was just that the people that I interviewed were really open and honest about their life experiences. I didn't have any sense that they were holding back, and that they had a really strong desire to be heard. And as I said, I was on vacation before I came back to do the survey. And when I arrived at my location, I was informed that there had been people coming throughout the week asking to participate in the survey. And I think that was a really important moment for me to see how important this opportunity was for people whose voices aren't heard, for them to be heard. I think that's really important to remember as we begin to explore what some of what we learned from this experience, is that people really wanted to have their voice heard, and for us to do something about it.
For sure. Thank you, Merle. That was really insightful. And I think it's a good way to set up as Anna begins to speak about what we learned from Registry Week. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna to share the results. So thank you so much.
Perfect. So I'm going to just take a moment to set up my screen here. Stephanie, can you let me know if you can see the slides okay? Perfect. Okay. So now we're going to move to the section that discusses some of the preliminary results that we found from participants and from analyzing the survey. And you'll see different questions around demographics, different questions around experiences, as well as towards the end of the presentation, some qualitative and open-ended questions that participants were able to comment on their experiences and kind of their perceptions as well. And as we go, I'll explain kind of some of the structure, because you'll see a lot of different graphs as well. So in total, there were 93 unique surveys filled out. So we went through the surveys and made sure that there was no duplication. So what that means is that in total, the survey included 103 people experiencing homelessness. So that included 73 single adults, 12 youth. So who we defined as the youth group was individuals aged 24 or under, and 8 families that had a total of 10 children. So for families, the average of children per family ranged between 1 to 2 children per family, with the average age of children being 10.3 years old. And 88% of the families that we spoke to identify themselves as single parent households. And just to note for the rest of the presentation as well, that when we refer to families and answers that were provided by families, we take into account the responses provided by the family representative. So usually that was a parent in all cases of the survey who filled out the survey. So that's what the responses of the families mean when we refer to it. So as Stephanie mentioned earlier, service took place in over 25 different locations across the county. So in total, 82% of the surveys were filled out in Woodstock, 9% in Tillsonburg, 4% in Ingersoll, and 5% were not specified. So the next few slides of this presentation show a breakdown of different demographic factors of the individuals who participated in the survey. And for each question, the numbers presented will reflect the total of those who have provided a response. So excluding those who said don't know or refused to answer or left the question blank. So only those who have provided an answer. So the average age of individuals who participated in the survey was 39, and those were the ranges of ages. So the majority of the participants who participated said that they were either 25 to 34 or 35 to 44, but there was quite a range from 15 to 75 as well. 63% of respondents identified as men, 36% identified as women, and 1% identified as non-binary. In terms of sexual orientation, 88% of respondents identified as straight or heterosexual, 5% identified as pansexual, 5% as bisexual, and 3% as gay, asexual, or did not identify. So respondents were asked how long they have been living in Oxford County for and provided the following responses. So the majority stated that they've always lived in Oxford County. So that was 26%. And 20% said that they lived in Oxford County for 20 plus years, and 14% said that they lived in Oxford County for 10 to 20 years. So overall, altogether, 60% of those that we spoke to said that they've either always been here or have lived in Oxford County for over 10 years. And for those that haven't always been in Oxford County, the average length of time for living in Oxford County was 12 years. Participants were also asked various questions relating to their demographic experiences and identities. So as you see in the groups here, so of those who responded to the question whether they came to Canada as an immigrant, refugee, or refugee claimant, 10% of individuals who responded said that they identified as an immigrant or refugee to Canada. And the average length of time living in Canada for those individuals who responded was 35 years. 12% of individuals identified as First Nations, Métis, or having Indigenous ancestry. And 5% of individuals stated that they had either served in the military and or the RCMP. Participants were also asked whether as a child or youth they were ever in foster care or a group home. So of the total participants, so all the groups together, 28% stated that they have lived in a foster care or group home as a child or youth. It is important to highlight a significant difference between the group, though, when we looked at the specific groups, that for the youth group, 42% of all youth participated said that they had experienced living in foster care or group home as a child or youth. And that will come up later as well when we explore some of the causes of homelessness. And you will see that for youth, one of the top causes is conflict with family or parent or guardian. So knowing this is really important to inform kind of how we look at the other findings as well. In terms of highest level of education, the most common response regarding participants' highest level of education was high school completed. So 42% said that they had completed high school. 24% of the sample said that they completed some high school. So the most common response within that was either grade 11 or grade 10 fully completed, and some had completed grade 12 as well. And 16% had completed college or university. And then for elementary school, GED, and some college, the percentages were lower. So the majority of respondents completed either high school, some high school, or college or university. So the next few questions will be presented using a similar graph format, and I just want to take a minute to explain it just because it's going to be consistent throughout the presentation. So you'll see the blue will represent the total, so all groups combined together. The orange will represent single adults, gray will represent youth, and then yellow will represent family as well. So in the questions that show differences between groups, that's what those colors will mean. And there's also a legend on every slide as well. So when participants were asked about what their primary sources of income were, they were able to provide different responses. So this is kind of reflecting the total of all responses. So overall, across groups, the most common sources of income were welfare social assistance at 43%, disability benefit at 35%, and an equal 7% of GST, HST refund, seniors benefits, and informal income sources. There were differences in income between groups. So as you can see, the most common sources of income for families were child and family tax benefits, full-time employment, and part-time employment. For youth, the most common sources of income were disability benefits, money from friends and family, and pretty equal percentages for other sources of income. And for single adults, the most common sources of income were similar to the total. So welfare social assistance, disability benefits, and seniors benefits as well. Participants were asked the question, where do you sleep most frequently? So kind of to reflect where they're usually staying. And that's getting at some of those definitions that Stephanie was talking about in terms of the three categories of accommodation. So unsheltered, provisionally accommodated, and emergency sheltered. So of those who responded to this question, the majority were provisionally accommodated, so 46% of the total. So that was either couch surfing at 32%, staying in hotels or motels at 8%, and staying in transitional housing at 6%. The second most common response was unsheltered with 32% total. So that was either outdoor at 28% or other at 4%. So other places included examples such as cars, bus shelters, etc., and other forms of shelter of that kind. And then, as you can see also from the graphs, there are some differences between the groups as well. So for families, the most common form of accommodation was emergency shelter. So 50% of families said that that's where they most commonly stay. For youth, the most common place of accommodation was couch surfing at 57% of the youth. And for single adults, the most common place of shelter was outdoors at 31% of single adults saying that they stay outdoors most commonly. Participants were also asked where in Oxford usually stay, and that question was framed in a way where the survey was taking place was the municipality where they usually stay. So 88% said that yes, where they were taking the survey was where they usually stayed, and 9% of the total said no. So what that means is that some people could be taking the survey in Tillsonburg, for example, but staying primarily in Woodstock and vice versa. So the majority of participants said that they usually stay in Woodstock. 11% said that they usually stay in Tillsonburg. 8% usually stay in Ingersoll. 3% also said that they commonly move around, so they could be moving around between Ingersoll, Tillsonburg, Woodstock, etc. One of the questions that we also asked was whether participants experienced barriers to accessing the emergency shelters in Oxford County, so the Inn, Salvation Army, and DASO. So in total, 59% of those who responded, so again, across groups, said that they did experience barriers, and 41% said that they did not. And there was some variation between groups here as well. So the group that said most commonly yes to experiencing barriers was single adults. And the groups that said no were families and youth. So single adults experience more barriers than youth and family based on this graph. And this was a follow-up question to the previous question. So the responses here reflect those that said, yes, I have experienced barriers. And those were some of the barriers that they identified. And just to note that you may also notice that some of those percentages don't add up to 100, and that's because participants could select multiple barriers, as many as they wished. So to highlight some of the most commonly identified barriers, the first one, the number one was feeling uncomfortable staying at a shelter at 31%. The second one was safety concerns, 29%. And again, that included varying safety concerns, whether it was concerns with shelter, concerns with physical safety, concerns with mental health safety and trauma, etc. Lack of safe storage for possessions at 25%. Lack of space and shelter, so being refused service due to shelter being full or at capacity, 23%, and strict or unreasonable expectations or rules in shelter, also 23%. And you can see some of the other barriers as well, which are close in percentages as well. So lack of transportation to get to shelter, curfew, limited hours of access, refusal of services based on sobriety or substance use or other rules of the shelter, etc. And this barriers piece is something that we will also continue to look into and explore as we move into the next stages of this project, as Stephanie will talk about a bit later. We asked participants in total for how much time they have experienced homelessness over the past year. So over of those who responded, 40% of the total group said that they had experienced homelessness for the entire year. 80% stated that they experienced homelessness for 8 to 10 months, and there was pretty similar percentages across all the other ones, with 12% saying that they've experienced homelessness for less than a total of a month over the past year. We also, in follow-up to this question, asked participants how many different times they have experienced homelessness over the past year. So that could include more episodic instances of housing where individuals, for example, lost their housing, stayed in shelter for a few weeks or months, and then found new housing, or maybe returned to homelessness afterwards as well. So more so episodes of homelessness within the year, or more chronic homelessness. So that would likely be reflected in those who responded that they were homeless for the whole year. And the average number of times that an individual experienced homelessness over the past year was 2.3 times in total. But responses ranged from 1 time, which was the most common response, that they had experienced homelessness once in the past year. And there were also 7% who said that they had experienced homelessness 10 plus times over the past year. So kind of like falling in and out of homelessness and moving back and forth as well. So 1 time could indicate both that someone had been experiencing one continuous period of homelessness, so more chronic homelessness over the years, so like one whole experience of homelessness over the whole year, or one instance of temporarily losing housing, so more so episodic homelessness. We asked participants to indicate how old they were the first time that they had experienced homelessness, the first time that they had ever experienced homelessness. Overall, across groups, the most common responses were ages 11 to 15 and 16 to 20 at 28 and 24%, but responses did range quite a bit. And so the range was from the first time they experienced homelessness, they were 5 to 70 plus of first time of experiencing homelessness. And there were some differences between groups, with single adults most commonly beginning to experience homelessness younger than the rest of the group, so at ages 11 to 15, and a few at ages 5 to 10. That was the only group who had indicated that they started experiencing homelessness between ages 5 to 10. The average age for youth was 16 to 20, or that was the one that received the most responses. And for families, the first time experiencing homelessness was at around age 36 to 45. That was the most common response. So in this question, we asked participants what happened that caused you to lose your housing most recently. So participants, again, with the income, similar to the income question, participants could choose as many options from the list as they wished, as well as indicate some other options that in addition to those that were on the list. So overall, for those who responded to this question, the top 5 causes of homelessness were not enough income for housing. So for example, loss of benefit, loss of income, loss of employment, etc., 22%. Substance use issue at 18%, conflict with a spouse or a partner at 14%, conflict with a landlord or tenant, or landlord-tenant conflict, 14%, and mental health issue or conflict with others such as siblings, relatives, friends at 11%, both of them. So when breaking down by group, you can also see that there are differences between the groups. So for single adults, the most commonly identified causes were similar to the total. So insufficient income for housing, substance use issue, conflict with spouse or partner, landlord-tenant conflict. For youth, the most commonly identified causes were conflict with parent or guardian, substance use issue, mental health issue, and conflict with siblings, relatives, or friends. And for families, the most common causes of current homelessness were experiencing abuse by a spouse or partner, unfit or unsafe housing conditions, as well as conflict with family, so parent or guardian or others. So 2 additional questions were asked separately regarding additional causes of current homelessness. So the first question was, has your current period of homelessness been caused by an experience of emotional, physical, psychological, sexual, or other type of trauma, or by any other trauma that you have experienced? And a total of 55 respondents who responded to this question said said yes for 55%, and 45 said no. And there was, again, some difference within the groups, with families being higher than the total. So more respondents from kind of the family group said that their current period of homelessness was caused by a type of abuse or trauma that they've experienced. And the second question asked participants, is your current homelessness in any way caused by a relationship that broke down, an unhealthy or abusive relationship, or because family or friends caused you to become evicted? And overall to that question, participants, 67% of participants said yes and 33 said no, and that was pretty similar across categories as well. In follow-up to the question on the previous slides that was asking participants to discuss some of the causes of current homelessness, we also asked participants how long ago they lost their housing. So how long ago something had happened that caused the breakdown of their housing. And overall, the average of most recent entry into homelessness was 1 year to 10 months ago. However, when we look at the percentage distribution, we can see that 55% entered homelessness most recently within the past 9 months, so since March 2020. And that's where kind of the majority category is. So within that 55%, the majority of respondents entered homelessness most recently within the past month, so 19%. And then the other two highest categories were within the past 2 to 5 months and within the past 6 to 9 months. Other than that, similar percentages for 18 and 16 were within the past 1 to 2 years or 2 to 5 years. And some respondents also said that they've lost their housing most recently, so meaning they've been experiencing homelessness for 5 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years, 20 plus years. So that was 2% for each. So in this question, we asked participants to indicate whether they identified with experiencing any of those health challenges and mental health challenges currently. So 76% of participants said that they had experienced mental health challenges currently. 74% said that they had experienced substance use challenges currently. 40% experienced illness or medical condition. 36% experienced learning disabilities or cognitive limitations. And 36% experienced physical disabilities. So when we asked whether those challenges have changed in any way, and if so, how have they changed since folks became homeless across the board? For all 5 challenges, the majority of participants for each said that they had worsened since becoming homeless. So now we get to the part with the qualitative and open-ended questions. So the following few slides, you will see some are presented in graph form, but those were not options that given to participants. So this is just a tally of kind of like most common responses and themes. So participants were asked open-ended questions, and then we're just able to provide their own kind of like experience, their own examples, their own wording. So for this one, we asked participants whether COVID-19 has impacted their housing situation in any way. And participants gave quite a few different responses and different examples and ways in which COVID-19 has impacted their situation. So 28% said that COVID-19 has not impacted their housing situation, but the rest, 72%, discussed ways in which it has. So the number one kind of impact from COVID on housing was that COVID had increased barriers to housing. So that's including less availability of housing, increasing rent prices, as well as specific barriers to accessing housing or to even being able to kind of begin the stages towards accessing housing. So some examples that participants gave were landlords not letting people into the home, more competition over places just by virtue of less places being available, and then increased requirements for things like deposits, documentation. Some even cited that they were requested to take a COVID test before entering, all of which were housing kind of barriers to obtaining housing during the COVID period. So the next most common two categories were cannot connect with support systems. So that was one of them. And support systems in this case referred to both informal supports. So folks discussed how they can't connect with family and friends. And if they are staying somewhere, for example, provisionally accommodated, they can't have visitors as before. So all of that kind of impacting both the housing situation and their overall situation and their overall kind of well-being. And also support systems referred to formal support systems. So some discussed barriers connecting with kind of the formal supports that they have been connected with previously. 11% also said that COVID has created a situation where they felt that they had fewer resources and services available and increased barriers to accessing those services. So that was referring more so to formal support system and formal services. So for example, some examples provided were changes in schedule of services and limited hours of access, again, due to COVID. Reduction of numbers of bed and shelters. So that was one that was commonly identified as well. Canceled meetings or services due to COVID-related restrictions because of closures or because of just scheduling things or moving schedules around. So saying, you know, delaying even the opportunity to begin to talk about housing. As well as some other ones. And just to highlight here that there is a category on its own that is saying more difficult to get food, but that was one that was also discussed in kind of the services increased barriers. So discussing not being able to go to as many places because places were closed or there was limited access. So that included, again, places for shelter and places to get kind of basic needs such as food as well. So that there were increased barriers to accessing those. Other responses for some of the less common responses, including losing employment due to COVID, increasing risk of vulnerability in general, whether that was in terms of safety, whether that was in terms of health for those folks who are immunocompromised, et cetera, and increasing barriers to going to shelter or finding shelter because of that too, just the fear of safety and the fear of kind of health as well. And increased hopelessness about the future and fear about the future was also a response that was provided. In preparation for of the questions in general, and I should have said that a bit earlier, but we've worked collaboratively with individuals experiencing homelessness to design the questions. And this was a question that folks thought would be helpful to include. And the question that was asked of participants was, what is one word that you would use to describe the homeless community in the area? So this is another open-ended question that we asked participants, and they provided a variety of responses, both in one word and some were a bit longer as well. And the comments were both kind of describing both the homeless community in the area, as well as how describing their experience of homelessness as well in general. So the larger the words here, the most frequently stated they were. So for example, the word sad was the one most commonly stated by participants. Some of the words provided, I'm just going to read them out, were sad, lost, terrible, too many, worrisome, underprivileged, unlucky, desperate, cold and lonely, respectful, supportive, we're not monsters, horrible, unstable, in desperate need, special, rough, family, community, and friendly. And there were other ones as well that you can see on the screen. So this is another open-ended question that we asked participants, and those were the responses that they provided. So we asked specifically, what are the two things that are keeping you from having a permanent place to live? And I'll just highlight that the top three factors or examples that were provided were actually system level and systemic housing and poverty related issues. So those top three were lack of income or low income, so insufficient income to pay for living, pay for bills, rent, etc. So that was at 28% of total responses. Lack of availability of housing and long wait lists, that was at 18%, and unaffordable housing and lack of affordable housing at 13%. Other less common responses included limited opportunities or job security, as well as barriers to housing, such as transportation, pets, debt, criminal history, credit score, stigma, etc. So the last open-ended question that we ask, and again, participants could just say whatever experience or whatever words that came to mind for them. They weren't given any of those options. So that question asked, what are the two things that you need to help you keep housing once you get it? So similarly to the previous question, the top two responses, and by quite a lot percentage-wise, were system-level supports that go hand in hand with kind of the current challenges experienced. So the number one response was stable income and employment, whether that's through benefits or through employment, just having income that supports housing and income that is livable. And the second response was supports in general. So that included housing supports, supports with budgeting, physical support, supports with employment, etc. So kind of like the system level and community level supports to help with some of the challenges experienced. And the third most common one was supportive relationships. So that included, again, both formal, more informal supports like family, friends, the community in general, the community being supportive of individuals, being inclusive of individuals, as well as formal support from staff. So whether it includes services, but also staff being supportive and inclusive of folks as well. Some other responses provided here as well that were not as common as the other ones were mental health supports, structure, safety, stability, privacy, and some of those ones, specific ones here, are more around access to both equal opportunity and resources. So for example, access to Wi-Fi or phone, that came up a few times, and also that came up in the previous slide regarding the challenges to housing. So, folks spoke about it being a barrier to housing because they're unable to even connect with resources or reach out or even begin their housing search if they are not able to access the information in the communication medium. So that was one that was kind of cited under equal opportunity and equal resources. So this brings us kind of to the conversation around next steps and how do we take this information and move forward. So Steph, back to you.
Can you keep sharing your screen and just move me forward? Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much, Anna. That was a lot of information, and I hope people, there's a lot of different pieces in there that I think are key for moving forward for sure. So the Housing Collaborative and all the partners involved are going to use the data that's come out of this to determine recommendations and next steps. We also are hoping to leverage the results for advocacy and future funding proposals as well. I think there's a lot of things in there that we can learn from and decide to explore further, or possibly put in some different recommendations that we can do to change things. But the partners also have committed to working together toward a coordinated system for services. And so this will be both for helping people with housing placements, as well as looking at the sort of system level pieces. So on a monthly basis, why do we have maybe this many people coming into homelessness? That's called inflow, and this many people going out, and what's the cause for that? So as things come up within the system, we can continue to update and try to figure out what's going on and what is needed to change that. So that's that system level response and working together. In terms of the rest of the project, we are doing a narrative piece, and so people that were a part of Registry Week were asked if they were willing to participate in some storytelling and photo voice pieces, which we will share back with the community, which I think is important for developing empathy, and sharing people's stories is really critical. There's also the other piece that we mentioned, which is the shelter review that we're undergoing. So the three shelters in our community, so the Inn through Operation Sharing, Salvation Army Emergency House, and Domestic Abuse Services Oxford are participating in a shelter review. This is an extensive process that we're going through, but it's going to include many different things, and part of it will be reviewing policies. There'll also be interviews with staff, partners, and people accessing the shelters, as well as people that are not accessing the shelters, and maybe there's reasons why they aren't. But this is really going to help us look at what are some possible things we could be doing differently, and look at those best practice standards that exist. So we will be sharing all this information with you as we continue on this path. But this is, as we said, Registry Week is a first step in communities that have ended chronic homelessness. This is sort of the first step that then leads to many other things. So we want to let you know that we're going to keep continuing to work together, and we're committed. So I think that's an important piece. So we're just looking at the time. We might have time for one question, but I wanted to, can you move to the next slide there, Anna? This is a fun photo here, but before we go into the questions, I wanted to say we're fortunate to have many amazing organizations in the community that work with people to try to access housing, or to provide them with emergency shelter when it's needed. So we thought we would also invite Jade and Allison from the Oxford County Community Health Center Housing Stability Team to join this last portion if there are any questions specific to housing stability, because they do some great work in that area, in addition to other partners that exist in the community too. So I don't know, Jade or Allison, if you want to say a couple words before we maybe have one question, and then I'm just trying to get you on the screen here. I think you're able to show your video now, maybe. Hi. So there's Allison and Jade, and I think you're muted from the Housing Stability Team.
Hello, hello.
Do you want to say a couple things about what you do as housing stability workers?
Sure. I mean, I guess in a few sentences or less, we work here at the Oxford County Community Health Center, and we work with those in Oxford County who are experiencing homelessness, so either sheltered or unsheltered. And we also work with people who are at risk of being homelessness. So that piece that we talked briefly a little bit about at the beginning. So working with people that we know that if they're housed, we want to really support them in staying housed. And so that's a really important part of our job. And we work with a lot of partners in the community to do that. So that is kind of what we do in one minute or less.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. So Jody, is there a question that you wanted to pose? Maybe one? I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like there were 4 questions that were submitted, and the one that I think could be pretty prominent to discuss is since youth are under 24, does this mean that kids age out of care? They are often destined to homelessness. So this was in relation to the question that was surrounding, or the slide that was surrounding that youth experienced a higher percentage of youth who are experiencing homelessness have been in foster care and or group homes at some point in their life. So this question was surrounding that. So if any of our panelists would like to speak to youth coming out of care being destined to homelessness, feel free.
Allison and Jade, do you want to take that one?
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't to speak specifically to kids aging out of care. I don't think we've had a lot of experience in that department. We do work with a youth housing worker who does work specifically with youth who are 16 and 17-year-olds who, when the legislation changed with child welfare, they were incorporated in that. And so that he's been working with the Children's Aid Society around supporting those youth that are getting older and ready maybe to take on more of an independence. So I think when it comes to some of the youth that are aging out of care, we are just starting to really see that with coordinating with our youth worker as well, and kind of helping transition from that 16 and 17-year-old to 18, whereas we kind of take over. So it's definitely on our radar, and it's definitely something that we are seeing. And I know that our youth worker is working really hard in his program to sort of identify them before they become unsheltered at that point.
Thank you. Jody, I saw maybe we will talk about the other end of the spectrum, and that will be our last question. I saw Brian had a question about older adults. Can you read that one out?
Yeah, that was going to be the second one I was going to propose. So the next question here was surrounding when Anna presented the ages of people experiencing homelessness, and we saw quite a clear downslope from around mid-20s to mid-30s down into the seniors age in terms of how many people were experiencing homelessness within those age groups. So with that in mind, can we conclude that old age security and CPP keeps seniors housed?
So can I answer this one? Is that okay? Yeah. So I don't think we can necessarily conclude that. So there were some individuals that identified that their first time experiencing homelessness was actually as an older adult, and they would be receiving old age security, and it did indicate that. So I think we can say that there is quite a bit of evidence that shows that benefit programs such as the child tax benefit has really helped to alleviate poverty for groups, and that also older adults do receive the OAS and GIS and different pieces that and CPP that do definitely help keep people living above the poverty line, able to afford housing. However, there were some people within the folks that we did speak to that indicated they are on old age security and still are experiencing homelessness, and whether it be staying in motels or having to use shelter. So I think that we can say from the evidence that that they're definitely, it's helpful in terms of keeping people above the poverty line, but it doesn't mean that people aren't still experiencing homelessness when they are in those older years, whether they've been homeless for a long period of time, experiencing chronic homelessness, or they're new to homelessness because of a situation that's occurred. And we heard many different stories about different situations that happened. People working jobs too when they're older adults and still not being able to afford a place. So I think it's a really good question, because it's that whole piece that speaks to it's very complicated for people, and there's a lot of pieces going on and that contribute to homelessness.
Absolutely. And I see Kelly unmiked or unmuted, so I'm assuming she has something to share as well.
Well, I'm just going to, if I could add and maybe bring us back to one of Stephanie's very first slides from the beginning, which was that continuum of housing from the county. And I think it's really important, maybe a bit separate from this specific registry information, but to recognize Oxford County and many places around us and across the country have virtually zero vacancy rates. And both the rental rates and the cost of housing has escalated so high that when you have no rental units and the cost is so prohibitive that if you are on a very fixed income, whether that's ODSP, Ontario Works, old age, the availability of something that will work in that price range is they're few and far between now. So it is a crisis, again, across the board and across the ages.
For sure. Thank you for summarizing. And so, Anna, can you move to the next slide? So we want to thank everyone for asking questions. We want this conversation to continue as well. So please, please connect with us. Please also follow Social Planning Council, other collaborative members on social media. We've been using the hashtag Housing Oxford, and to keep up to date with this, we're going to try to share more information as it comes out. But just to keep in mind, you can see we have people, we got to highlight today the health center, but we have many different people in the community working to try to meet people's immediate needs. But then just to remember that although there's a lot of really difficult information in here to hear, because people are living in awful situations a lot of the time, but that to know that collectively we are trying to work together on a longer term systemic strategy to end homelessness. So we do ask, I guess we put call to action here because sometimes we leave these things feeling like, so now what can we do? So just to know that we are trying to work collectively on this piece as a community. But then also if you do feel so moved, a call to action would be if you do want to do something, there's a website here, recoveryforall.ca. It's actually a really cool campaign that's happening through the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And if you visit it, you'll see that you can enter your postal code in, and it will actually help you populate letters and different things from an advocacy perspective to different levels of government. I think it's important that we take collective action and try to have a voice. And there have been locally and provincially and federally, there have been dollars that have been being flowed to help with the housing crisis. But I think it's important to also share your voice. So because we know, and probably why you're all here and why we sit around the table and why everyone does the work that they do here, is that we believe that no one in our community deserves to live like this, that everyone has the right to a home. So we really do thank you. And I'm going to, Anna, if you move to the next slide, I think Kelly's going to close us out.
So on behalf of everyone, I would like to, I'll start actually by thanking those that are currently offering supports and services. So agencies, we have wonderful groups of staff and volunteers doing everything they can to help and to be supportive of people right now. So whether that's food or supports for shelter or housing assistance, people are trying and they're doing their best. Our goal is to end homelessness, but until that point, helping is really critical. And so there are lots of wonderful things happening. So thank you to those. I would like to thank the Ontario Trillium Foundation, because without their funding for this particular project, we wouldn't probably be in a position to do it. So we are very grateful that they've made this possible. And thanks to the members of the Oxford Housing Action Collaborative, some of which you still see on the screen, because there are really good work. There is good work happening, and there's a lot of efforts to create a better future for folks here in Oxford County. I would like to thank the participating agencies and community volunteers for committing their time and their effort, especially for those that were helping during the surveying last week. Your supports are much appreciated. It really made this work possible. Thank you to Stephanie in particular and her team for her planning and their work and organization and commitment to this. There were a lot of moving pieces and a lot of things to pull together. And so we are very grateful for everything that you have done to guide this effort. Thank you to Steph and Anna, Merle, Jody, Allison, and Jade for being on as part of the panel today to help educate people who are interested in learning more, to help dispel some myths about what is and isn't homelessness and what it looks like here in our community, and the fact that we actually have homelessness and we need to address it and come together as a community. And this is how we can bust myths and misunderstandings. This is how knowledge builds empathy and understanding and awareness, and that's how we can create community change. And most importantly, I thank all of you for joining us and showing your interest and commitment to this work. And I ask you to stay involved and stay connected, because there will be more work to come. And finally, most importantly, I would like to thank the individuals who took the time to graciously share their stories, their life. Those were deeply personal stories and experiences that they openly shared to give us information and data to move forward. That is not easy, and it is very much appreciated. So thank you all very much for joining us. And we look forward to the next opportunity where we can again connect and share. Meanwhile, I remind you that this has been recorded. This will be available to share broadly, and we ask that tell 2 friends and make sure that people do have a chance to watch. There's a lot of good information here, and again, to help create change. Thank you.